June 8, 1944, 07:15 hours. Normandy hedgerow country, 3 kilometers south of Carentan. Unteroffizier Klaus Richter pressed his cheek against the worn stock of his Kar98 Kurs, watching American infantry advance across the waterlogged field. Through his iron sights, he tracked a sergeant moving between cover positions. Richter's finger found the trigger. The Mauser barked. The American dropped. Richter's hands moved with practiced efficiency. Bolt up, back, forward, down. The spent cartridge tumbled into the mud beside him. Chamber loaded. He found another target. A private sprinting toward a stone wall. The K-98 kicked against his shoulder. The private stumbled and fell. What Richter didn't know, as he worked his bolt again, was that the Americans firing back at him weren't working bolts at all. The return fire came faster than anything Richter had experienced in 4 years of war. Not the sustained burr of a machine gun. Not the wild spray of a submachine gun. Something different. Measured. Controlled. But impossibly fast. 8 rounds hammered the hedgerow above his position in the time it took him to chamber his third cartridge. He pressed himself into the earth, confused. The sound was wrong. Individual rifle shots, but coming at a pace that defied the mechanics of bolt-action warfare. Beside him, Gefreiter Dieter Schmidt raised his head to return fire. The top of the hedgerow exploded in a shower of leaves and branches. Schmidt jerked back down. "They have machine guns in every position," he hissed. Richter shook his head. The sound wasn't right for machine guns. Each shot was distinct, deliberate, but they came in volleys that shouldn't be possible from men working bolt-action rifles. He had fought the British with their Lee Enfields. He had fought the French with their Lebels and Berthiers. He knew the rhythm of bolt-action combat. This was something else. From his command position 30 meters back, Lieutenant Wolfgang Bauer watched the firefight through field glasses. The American advance had stalled at the first hedgerow, just as doctrine predicted. His 3 squads occupied excellent defensive positions with clear fields of fire. The mathematics of this fight favored the defenders. It always did. You worked your bolt, found your target, fired your shot. The enemy worked their bolts, found their targets, fired their shots. Superior positioning and superior marksmanship determined the outcome. But the Americans weren't following the mathematics. Bauer counted muzzle flashes. 12 American riflemen visible in the field. They should be firing 12 to 15 aimed shots per minute, maximum, the same rate his own men could maintain with their Mausers. Instead, the volume of fire suggested 30 to 40 riflemen. His field glasses swept the hedgerow. No, 12 men. But the fire kept coming, steady, relentless, impossible. The Karabiner 98 Kurz had served Germany since 1898, though the Kurz variant, shorter and more practical for infantry combat, dated to 1935. Richter had trained on this rifle at the Doberitz military base in 1940. He knew its weight, 4.1 kilograms fully loaded. He knew its effective range, 500 meters with iron sights. He knew its capacity, 5 rounds in an internal magazine fed by stripper clips. He knew its rate of fire under combat conditions, 15 to 20 aimed shots per minute for an experienced soldier. He knew this rifle. He trusted this rifle. This rifle had served him through Poland, through France, through the frozen hell of the Eastern Front. The Mauser 98 system was the finest bolt-action design ever created, German engineering at its peak. The controlled feed system prevented double loading. The cock-on-opening design made the action smooth and fast. The twin locking lugs provided exceptional strength and accuracy. But as Richter worked his bolt for the 7th time, watching the Americans advance another 10 meters while rifle fire poured across the field like rain, he felt the first cold touch of doubt. The tactical doctrine was sound. German small unit tactics emphasized combined arms. The rifle squad built around the MG-42 machine gun. 7 riflemen with Karabiner 98 Kurz rifles supported one two-man machine gun team. The riflemen fixed the enemy in place with accurate, aimed fire. The machine gun delivered the killing blow. This system had devastated Polish cavalry, shattered French resistance, ground Russian divisions into blood and snow. The doctrine assumed the enemy fought with rifles like your own. Bolt action, 5 rounds, work the bolt between shots. When both sides operated under these constraints, superior tactics and superior marksmanship decided the engagement. The Germans excelled at both, but the American fire kept coming. Not wild, not suppressive, aimed shots, individual trigger pulls, but arriving at a tempo that shattered the fundamental assumptions of infantry combat. Obergefreiter Hans Müller, the MG-42 gunner in Richter's squad, opened fire from his position 20 meters to the right. The distinctive tearing cloth sound of Germany's most feared weapon split the air. 1,200 rounds per minute poured across the field. The American advance stopped. Men hit the ground. The machine gun had spoken. This was how firefights ended. The rifle duel reached equilibrium. Then the MG tipped the scales. Müller's barrel glowed. He burned through his first 50-round belt in 2.5 seconds, changed belts, fired again. The Americans stayed down behind cover. Good. The doctrine was working. Fix them with rifle fire, kill them with the machine gun. Müller would suppress them while Richter's squad maneuvered. Then the American fire resumed. Not from 12 positions now, from 8. 4 men had fallen or taken cover, but the 8 still firing delivered a volume that matched Müller's between his bursts. Individual rifles, semi-automatic, each American soldier wielding the firepower of a small machine gun. Bauer's radio operator called from the command post, reports coming in from 2nd and 3rd squads. Same situation, American rifle fire at impossible rates. The lieutenant acknowledged the reports and lowered his binoculars. He had seen the intelligence briefings. The Americans issued a semi-automatic rifle, the M1 Garand. Chambered in 30-06 Springfield. 8-round capacity. Gas-operated. No bolt to work between shots. Pull the trigger. The rifle fires, reloads itself, ready for the next shot. The briefings had mentioned this weapon. They had not mentioned that every American soldier carried one. German military intelligence had excellent information on American equipment. The reports described the Garand accurately. Semi-automatic operation. En-bloc clip feeding system. Effective range comparable to the Mauser. The reports noted this was the standard American service rifle, but somewhere between the intelligence assessment and the tactical reality, a critical understanding had failed to form. Standard issue meant every rifleman, not specialists, not designated marksmen, not elite units. Every private, every corporal, every sergeant in the American infantry carried a weapon that could fire 8 rounds as fast as he could pull the trigger. No bolt to cycle, no manual operation, just aim and shoot. Aim and shoot, aim and shoot. The mathematics of infantry combat had changed, and the change was absolute. At the Springfield Armory in Massachusetts, production of the M1 Garand had reached industrial scale that would have seemed impossible to German observers. In January 1944, 8 months before Richter found himself pinned in a Norman hedgerow, Springfield produced 122,001 rifles in 31 days. Not total small arms production, not including machine guns, submachine guns, pistols, just M1 Garand rifles. 4,000 rifles per day, 167 rifles per hour, nearly 3 rifles per minute, around the clock, for an entire month. Winchester repeating arms added their production to the total. International Harvester would contribute hundreds of thousands more. By the time the war ended, America would produce 5.4 million M1 Garand rifles, 5.4 million semi-automatic weapons, each capable of delivering aimed fire at 40 to 50 rounds per minute in trained hands. Germany had bolt-action rifles. The German semi-automatic program existed, certainly. The Gewehr 41. The Gewehr 43. Excellent weapons in their own right. But production numbered in tens of thousands, not millions. These weapons went to designated marksmen, to elite units, to specialized roles. The standard German infantryman carried what his father might have carried in the previous war, a Mauser 98, bolt action, 5 rounds, 15 shots per minute. The gap wasn't a subtle difference in capability. It was a chasm. An American rifle squad of 12 men could deliver 480 to 600 aimed shots per minute. A German rifle squad of equal size could deliver 180 to 240 shots per minute. The Americans could put 2.5 times as much lead downrange before the machine guns even entered the equation. Richter didn't know these numbers as he pressed himself into the mud of Normandy. He knew only that his Mauser, faithful companion through 4 years of combat, suddenly felt inadequate in his hands. He worked the bolt. Up, back, forward, down. Found a target. Fired. Worked the bolt again. The Americans firing back at him didn't work bolts. They just fired, and fired, and fired. The afternoon wore on. Bauer's platoon held their positions. The Americans didn't break through, but they didn't retreat either. The firefight settled into a grinding exchange that consumed ammunition at rates Bauer had never experienced. His riflemen went through their basic load of 60 rounds in the first 2 hours. Runners brought more ammunition from the supply point. The riflemen loaded stripper clips, fired their 5 rounds, loaded again. Across the field, the Americans fired, ejected 8-round clips with metallic pings that carried across the battlefield, reloaded in 2 seconds, fired again. The sound of those clips ejecting became a soundtrack of the engagement. Ping, ping, ping. 8 rounds gone. Next clip. Keep firing. As evening approached, Bauer received orders to withdraw. The American advance had broken through on the left flank. Second Company had collapsed under the weight of American firepower. The withdrawal would be covered by darkness. The platoon pulled back in good order, leaving the hedgerows to the Americans. At the company command post, Hauptmann Friedrich Hartmann debriefed his officers. The day's casualties were acceptable by Eastern Front standards, 15 killed, 31 wounded. But the tactical picture troubled him. His company had held superior defensive positions against a numerically comparable force. The engagement should have ended with the Americans beaten back or pinned in place until darkness forced a mutual withdrawal. Instead, his men had exhausted their ammunition and yielded ground to an enemy advance that never paused, never slowed, never ran dry of firepower. Hartmann's own rifle company carried approximately 12,000 rounds of Mauser ammunition into the engagement. They fired nearly all of it. Intelligence estimates suggested the Americans probably carried comparable basic loads. But the Americans hadn't run low. They hadn't slowed their fire. They hadn't rationed their ammunition or conserved their shots. They had maintained their rate of fire from first contact to final withdrawal. How? The mathematics didn't work unless the Americans had brought significantly more ammunition or fired significantly more efficiently. Hartmann suspected both. A semi-automatic rifle emptied its magazine faster, but a soldier could carry the same weight in ammunition. 8-round clips versus 5-round stripper clips meant fewer reloads for the same number of rounds. Less time fumbling with clips meant more time firing. The cumulative advantage was devastating. By June 19, 1944, 11 days into the Normandy campaign, German after-action reports began acknowledging the M1 Garand as a significant tactical problem. The reports noted American rifle squads delivered sustained fire comparable to German squads employing both rifles and submachine guns. The reports noted American ammunition consumption far exceeded German planning assumptions. The reports noted that conventional defensive tactics, which assumed both sides armed with bolt-action rifles, required revision when facing an enemy where every rifleman wielded semi-automatic firepower. Oberst Hans von Luck, commanding elements of the 21st Panzer Division in Normandy, wrote in his combat diary that American infantry possessed advantages in volume of individual small arms fire that allows them to maintain offensive momentum under conditions where traditional rifle-armed forces would be suppressed. Von Luck was a veteran of France, North Africa, and Russia. He knew infantry combat. He recognized what he faced. But recognition didn't provide solutions. You couldn't make bolt-action rifles fire faster by understanding the problem. You could train soldiers to work their bolts more efficiently, but physics imposed limits. The Mauser 98 mechanism required 4 distinct motions: lift the bolt handle, pull it back, push it forward, lock it down. Even the fastest soldiers needed a full second for this cycle. Add time to aim between shots, and 15 rounds per minute represented the practical maximum. The Americans just pulled the trigger. Gas pressure drove the operating rod. The bolt unlocked, extracted the spent case, cocked the hammer, fed the next round, locked again. All in a fraction of a second. The shooter maintained his sight picture. His hands stayed in firing position. He pulled the trigger again. The rifle fired again. No wasted motion. No mechanical delay. Just trigger, shot, trigger, shot, trigger, shot. In a firefight, those fractions of seconds accumulated into overwhelming advantage. The tactical implications cascaded through German defensive doctrine. Standard practice called for rifle squads to engage enemy infantry at ranges of 300 to 400 meters. At these distances, trained marksmen with Mauser rifles could deliver accurate fire while machine guns controlled key terrain. The engagement would develop as a duel between riflemen, with both sides working their bolts, both sides firing measured shots, both sides seeking advantageous positions. Against the Americans, this doctrine collapsed. The Germans fired their aimed shots, worked their bolts, fired again. The Americans fired their aimed shots, pulled their triggers, fired again, and again, and again. By the time a German soldier chambered his second round, the American had fired 3 or 4. By the time the German fired 5 shots, emptying his integral magazine and fumbling for a stripper clip, the American had fired 8 and reloaded his en-bloc clip in 2 seconds flat. The American could maintain offensive pressure. The German had to choose between returning fire slowly or taking cover to reload. Either choice surrendered the initiative. The firefight stopped being a duel and became a beatdown. German squad leaders adapted as best they could. They emphasized the machine gun more heavily. They positioned their riflemen to support the MG, not to engage in rifle duels. They accepted that American rifle fire would dominate the small arms engagement and planned around that reality. These adaptations helped, but they couldn't eliminate the fundamental problem. The Americans had 8 semi-automatic rifles per squad. The Germans had 7 bolt-action rifles and 1 machine gun. When the machine gun went silent to change barrels or reload, the German squad's firepower dropped by 70%. When an American BAR gunner reloaded, the squad still had 8 Garands firing. The infantry platoon, the basic building block of ground combat, suddenly favored the Americans by a margin that doctrine couldn't overcome. Gefreiter Schmidt died on June 24th, 16 days after the engagement south of Carrington. An American rifle bullet, probably from an M1 Garand, struck him in the chest during a firefight near Saint-Lô. Richter heard the shot, heard Schmidt's gasp, turned to see his squadmate sliding down the hedgerow with blood spreading across his tunic. The American who fired that shot had probably fired 2 more rounds before Schmidt hit the ground. Maybe he hit someone else. Maybe he suppressed another German position. Maybe he just kept firing because he could, because his rifle let him. Richter worked his bolt and fired back. Up, back, forward, down, aim, fire. Up, back, forward, down, aim, fire. The ritual of bolt-action infantry combat, the mechanical prayer that had sustained armies since the 19th century. But praying couldn't change mathematics. The Americans fired faster. They hit more targets. They kept firing when German soldiers had to reload. By July, intelligence reports quantified what frontline soldiers already knew. Captured American ammunition stocks revealed basic loads of 80 rounds per rifleman, carried in 10 8-round clips. The en-bloc clip system meant each American soldier conducted 10 reloads per basic load, each reload taking approximately 2 seconds. 20 seconds total reload time for 80 rounds. German soldiers carried 60 rounds in stripper clips of 5. 12 reloads. Each reload required opening the action, placing the clip, stripping rounds into the magazine, closing the action. Skilled soldiers needed 5 seconds. 70 seconds total reload time for 60 rounds. The Americans spent less time reloading and fired more ammunition. They maintained higher rates of fire and carried larger basic loads. They delivered more rounds on target in less time with fewer pauses. The cumulative effect transformed infantry combat from a contest of skill and position into an industrial process. American squads produced more firepower. German squads couldn't match the output. Production won. At the Springfield Armory, where John Garand had laboured for years to perfect his design, workers produced rifles at rates that would have seemed fantastical to German planners. Each M1 Garand cost approximately $85 to manufacture, not $85 in raw materials. $85 total, including labour, overhead, tooling, quality control. The rifle contained approximately 70 different parts, each precisely machined to tolerances measured in thousandths of an inch. Gas system, operating rod, rotating bolt, trigger group, safety mechanism, sights, stock. Every component manufactured to specifications that ensured reliability under combat conditions. $85. Mass-produced semi-automatic firepower, available to every American infantryman. The Germans couldn't match this. Not because German engineering was inferior. German precision manufacturing was world-class. But German industry operated under Allied bombing, resource shortages, competing priorities, and a strategic situation that demanded immediate solutions to immediate crises. Retooling millions of rifles from bolt-action to semi-automatic would consume resources needed for tanks, aircraft, submarines, artillery. The Germans had made their choice. Bolt-action rifles were good enough. The Mauser was proven. The Mauser was reliable. The Mauser worked, until it didn't. Lieutenant Bauer survived Normandy. He survived the Falaise pocket. He survived the retreat through France. By September 1944, he commanded the remnants of 2 platoons cobbled together from 3 shattered companies. Of the 137 men he had led into Normandy, 19 remained. The rest were dead, wounded, captured, or missing. The survivors had learned hard lessons about American firepower. They no longer tried to win rifle duels. They avoided open ground engagements. They relied on fortifications, prepared positions, interlocking fields of fire. They let the Americans come to them, then hit them with everything at once. Machine guns, mortars, artillery if available. The goal wasn't to win the firefight. The goal was to delay the Americans long enough to withdraw before the weight of their firepower crushed the defense. Sometimes it worked, usually it didn't. The Americans learned too. They used their firepower to suppress German positions, then maneuvered under the covering fire. They coordinated infantry and armor. They called artillery on suspected German positions. They brought overwhelming force to bear and ground forward through sheer weight of material. But it was the rifles that broke German morale. The machine guns were expected. The artillery was expected. The tanks were expected. Those were force multipliers, weapons of scale that appeared at critical moments. The rifles were different. The rifles were personal. Every American soldier carried one. Every engagement started with that sound. 8 rounds, rapid fire, semi-automatic. Then the ping of an empty clip ejecting. Then 8 more rounds. The sound was relentless. Everywhere, unending. German soldiers began to understand they were fighting an enemy who equipped every infantryman with capabilities the German army reserved for specialists. Post-war interrogations of German prisoners revealed a consistent theme. The M1 Garand didn't win the war. Allied artillery won the war. Allied air power won the war. Allied tanks, Allied logistics, Allied industrial capacity won the war. But the Garand changed how German soldiers experienced infantry combat. It transformed the basic infantry engagement from a symmetrical contest into an asymmetrical grind, where the Americans held the advantage every single time. A captured German training document from late 1944, discovered by Allied intelligence near Aachen, outlined revised tactics for engaging American infantry. The document acknowledged that the enemy's semi-automatic rifles provide significant advantage in rate of fire and sustainability. Direct rifle-to-rifle engagements should be avoided. German forces should employ machine guns, automatic weapons, and rapid maneuver to offset American fire superiority. The document essentially admitted that German infantry armed with standard rifles couldn't win firefights against American infantry armed with Garands. Doctrine adapted to acknowledge defeat. By December 1944, during the Ardennes offensive, German troops captured American supply dumps and weapons stocks. Among the captured equipment, M1 Garand rifles drew particular attention. German soldiers who had fought Americans recognized them immediately. Some kept them. Some units issued captured Garands to designated marksmen or squad leaders. Ammunition was a problem. The 30-06 Springfield cartridge wasn't compatible with German logistics, but units that stayed near American supply lines could scavenge ammunition. The Garands were worth the trouble. Obergefreiter Franz Gärtner, serving with the 2nd Panzer Division during the Bulge, wrote to his wife in late December. The letter survived the war. "We captured American rifles," he wrote. "They fire so quickly, 8 shots without touching the bolt. You just pull the trigger. Pull again, pull again. The Americans have millions of these. We have Mausers, good rifles but slow. We work the bolt after every shot. They just shoot. That's why they win." Gärtner died on January 9th, 1945, near Bastogne. Whether he carried his Mauser or a captured Garand, the records don't say. On January 26, 1945, as German forces retreated across the Rhine and Allied armies prepared for the final push into Germany, Lieutenant General George Patton sat at his desk in 3rd Army headquarters and wrote a letter to Major General Levin H. Campbell, Jr., the War Department's Chief of Ordnance. The letter was official correspondence on 3rd Army letterhead, professional, formal. But Patton's opening line became one of the most famous endorsements in military history. "In my opinion, the M1 rifle is the greatest battle implement ever devised," Patton continued, praising not just the Garand but American ordnance in general. Machine guns, mortars, artillery, tanks, all superior, all effective. But he led with the rifle, the weapon that every soldier carried, the weapon that transformed American infantry from comparable to superior, the weapon that made the difference in 10,000 small engagements that collectively determined the outcome of campaigns. Patton knew rifles. He had served since the turn of the century. He had seen the Springfield '03. He had seen the Enfield. He had commanded troops armed with various weapons in various wars. He understood that infantry combat came down to fire and maneuver. Fire to suppress the enemy, maneuver to gain advantage. The side that fired more effectively could maneuver more freely. The side with better weapons won more engagements. the side that won more engagements, won campaigns. The M1 Garand let American infantry fire more effectively. That simple advantage cascaded through every level of combat. Squads suppressed enemy positions more efficiently. Platoons maintained offensive momentum. Companies seized objectives. Battalions advanced. Divisions drove forward. Armies won. Patton called it the greatest battle implement ever devised. He wrote those words after 3 years of combat across North Africa, Sicily, France, and Germany. He wrote them based on observation, experience, and results. His Third Army had broken through German defences, shattered German counterattacks, driven across France at speeds that rewrote the tactical manuals. His infantry carried M1 Garand rifles. German infantry carried Kar98 Kurz rifles. Patton knew which army won the firefights. The production totals told the story in cold numbers. By the end of the war, American arsenals had produced 5,468,772 M1 Garand rifles. Germany produced approximately 14.6 million Kar98 Kurz rifles during the entire war. Larger total, certainly. But the Germans equipped all their infantry across all fronts for 6 years of war. The Americans equipped their forces, allies included, and still had surplus. American monthly production in the peak year exceeded German quarterly production. And every American rifle was semi-automatic. Every German rifle was bolt action. The capability gap was absolute. Klaus Richter survived the war. He surrendered to American forces in April 1945 near the Elbe River. His captors allowed him to keep small personal items. His Mauser went into a collection pile with thousands of others. Bolt-action rifles, 5-round capacity, the weapons that lost. He never saw that specific rifle again. In post-war years, he settled in Hamburg and worked as a machinist. He rarely spoke about the war. But in a 1978 interview for a German veteran's oral history project, the interviewer asked about American weapons. Richter was silent for a moment. Then he said, "They're rifles. The M1. We knew about them. Intelligence told us. But knowing and experiencing are different things. You work your bolt, they just shoot. Work your bolt again, they shoot again. You think you can match them with skill and training. You can't. They had better rifles, more of them. That was the war, really. They had more of everything, and it was better." The rifles were just the most obvious example. The interviewer asked if the Mauser was inferior. Richter shook his head. The Mauser was excellent, accurate, reliable, strong. I trusted that rifle with my life. But it was a bolt-action rifle in a semi-automatic war. We lost the firefights because we worked bolts and they didn't. Simple as that. German military analysts conducting post-war studies reached similar conclusions. A 1948 Wehrmacht review of small arms development noted that the M1 Garand provided American infantry with sustained firepower that German bolt-action rifles could not match. This advantage was multiplied by superior American production capacity and logistics. The combination of technological superiority and industrial scale created conditions where German infantry fought at a permanent disadvantage in basic rifle engagements. The review recommended that future German military forces adopt semi-automatic rifles as standard issue. When West Germany rearmed in the 1950s, they did exactly that. The new Bundeswehr received G3 battle rifles, selective fire, 20-round magazines. No soldier in the new German army would work a bolt in combat. The lesson had been learned. Semi-automatic firepower was the minimum standard for modern infantry. Bolt-action rifles belonged in museums and sniper schools. The era that produced the Mauser 98 and the Springfield Ort 3 had ended. The M1 Garand represented the transition point. The moment when industrial capacity and mechanical innovation combined to give individual soldiers capabilities previously reserved for crew-served weapons. By 1957, when the last M1 Garand rolled off the Springfield production line, the United States had manufactured over 5 million rifles in a 20-year span. Many served through World War II, Korea, and into the early years of Vietnam. The rifle Patton praised in January 1945 continued to equip American forces for another 2 decades. It became the standard by which other military rifles were judged. It established semi-automatic operation as the baseline requirement for service rifles, and it changed the mathematics of infantry combat permanently. German soldiers who faced the M1 Garand in Normandy, hedgerows, Italian mountains, Belgian forests, and German towns learned that lesson 8 rounds at a time. They learned it in the sound of semi-automatic fire that never paused, never slowed, never gave them time to work their bolts and return fire on equal terms. They learned it in the casualties that mounted faster than doctrine predicted. They learned it in the firefights that lasted minutes but consumed their ammunition in fractions of the expected time. They learned it in defeat. Klaus Richter learned it on June 8, 1944, in a waterlogged field south of Carentan. He learned it in the weeks and months that followed, in 100 engagements where American rifles fired faster than German rifles. American squads delivered more firepower than German squads. American infantry advanced while German infantry retreated. He learned it every time he worked his bolt and heard the ping of an American en-bloc clip ejecting across the battlefield. 8 rounds gone. Next clip. Keep firing. The Americans just kept firing. And General Patton was right. The M1 Garand was the greatest battle implement ever devised. Not because it was perfect, not because it won the war alone, but because it gave American infantry an advantage in the one thing that mattered most in ground combat: firepower. Sustained, reliable, overwhelming firepower. In the hands of millions of soldiers, across thousands of battles, on every front where Americans fought, the Garand delivered. 8 rounds, semi-automatic, 40 to 50 rounds per minute, against 5 rounds, bolt action, 15 to 20 rounds per minute. The mathematics were brutal. The outcome was inevitable. The Germans knew it, even if they didn't want to admit it. Their rifle was a masterpiece of 19th century engineering. The American rifle was a masterpiece of 20th century warfare. The difference decided firefights. The firefights decided battles. The battles decided campaigns. The campaigns decided the war. And it all came down to this. The Americans didn't have to work their bolts.